policy plug, like where did that brand come from?
Yeah, so, just like you got the plug for the shoes, you got the plug. We wanted to be the plug for all things policy. I noticed over, my long career in policy and advocacy that a lot of people are turned off by policy because they're turned off by politics. And they might be related, but they're not the same. And both are necessary, but it's policy that hurts people, right? So it's not just individuals. It's not like just racist Joe sitting out there, from the Klan that's hurting you. It's entrenched in policy. So if we look at even like the Crown Act and how there's hair discrimination and that sort of violence that people take in, that's policy. For sure. That was put into law that then is somewhat regulating what we have. So the policy plug, we want it to be an empowering agent.
You down. When I fall off, it be a while I'm putting you down. When I fall off, it be a while I'm putting you down. Put you down. Put you down. Put you down.
All right, we're going to get right into it then, man. Thank y'all for tuning into another episode of PYD, the only podcast with the watch the big fella, Boss Down Big. We are live in Miami, by the way, at the podcast summit. I got a guest in the building with me. Introduce yourself.
Hey, what's up, everybody? My name is Breon Wells. I'm the executive producer and host of The Policy Plug. I'm a political strategist, policy advisor, own my own lobbying firm.
Okay, I like the sound of that. So Policy Plug, like where did that brand come from?
Yeah, so, just like you got the plug for the shoes, you got the plug. We wanted to be the plug for all things policy. I noticed over, my long career in policy and advocacy that a lot of people are turned off by policy because they're turned off by politics. And they might be related, but they're not the same. And both are necessary, but it's policy that hurts people, right? So it's not just individuals. It's not like just racist Joe sitting out there, from the Klan that's hurting you. It's entrenched in policy. So if we look at even like the Crown Act and how there's hair discrimination and that sort of violence that people take in, that's policy. For sure. That was put into law that then is somewhat regulating what we have. So the policy plug, we want it to be an empowering agent. So that communities all across, around from Barack Obama to Pookie and Ray Ray, they needed to know you don't need a PhD, in political science or in public policy to be able to say like, this hurts. This is what I think needs to be done for the value of my vote. This is me being instructive.
I like the sound of that. So how many hosts is on the show?
It's just me on this one. Yep.
So you have guests. That's what's going on.
Guests. Yep, we have guests, and in part, what we have done is curated this content where some of our guests are these high visible members of Congress or these elected officials, and then you have folks like these activists and advocates, or even Odessa Kelly. She was our first episode that we had, and Odessa Kelly was this activist and advocate who then decided she wanted to run for office. She's LGBTQ. She is tatted up. And the reason we wanted to do that is because we believe even if I tell you, you can go into the policy space, you still wouldn't believe me. But when you see somebody that looks somewhat like you, it's like, well, wait a minute. And they talking about policy things and wait, they're moving and shaking things in that industry. It helps us meet our goal of helping everybody know you already belong, full stop, where you are today at the policy tables.
What's up, y'all? This one just Leland. Go back.
Keep going.
Okay.
If you mess up,
just start. All right. What's up, y'all?
In between,
I got you. All right. What's up, y'all? This one just Leland. If y'all on the go, listen to our audio. Puttinyadown.show. Once again, you're on the go, listen to the audio. Puttinyadown.show.
I love that. So what policy do you feel like it is one policy that overall hinders people from pursuing whatever they're pursuing? Like, is it a particular policy?
I think one of the policies that does hinder people is access to the ballot box.
Okay.
A lot of people don't engage in policy and they don't because they hate politics, but in part it's because we have this deep history in our country of politicians, elected officials having too much control over who can vote, right? Mm-hmm. And so if you can only experience that for so many times, even though we say, oh, get out the vote and your vote matters, what you feel is different. For sure. And so that apathy, right? And that's its intention, is to get folks to just say my vote doesn't matter and stay home. So that's why I would say if you're not having access at the ballot box, you can't even have the say over the economy.
For sure.
You can't have a say over, as a creative, what you can do. One of the things that we discuss on our show is the fact that, Rihanna performed at the Super Bowl.
Yep.
Right? Performed in the halftime show. I thought it was very telling. It was the baby bump, right? It was a real, it was a very creative expression.
Definitely.
The Federal Communications Commission is still actively investigating her and seeking, out of this thing that maybe her content was a lot too raunchy for these kids. And so here is, again, where that's policy. But if you don't vote and you don't have a say on who's in office and who's in these commissions and who's in these other spaces, it's still regulating your life. And so that's why I'd say that voting rights, access to the ballot box, is that one cornerstone policy.
For sure. So tell the people where you're from, first of all.
Yeah,
Where
so it's complicated, right? Facebook, hashtag complicated. I was born in Spain. My father was Air Force.
Okay, that's dope.
My parents were born and raised in Southeast D.C.
Okay.
And I've lived there for the last 23 years. So, that's the longest space I've had. I've lived in Germany, Turkey, England, but the one I had the most time is that I'm from the DMV area.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, so what kind of how are the politics in D.C.? I know it's the inner city politics versus like the United States, the broader, like what kind of politics do you feel like DC has that you don't see in other places?
Yeah, it's funny you ask that because DC's not a state.
Right.
And so DC, since it's not a state, and even though it sits in the epicenter of like all of not just in the United States, but we make global decisions in the United States, in DC, that affects the rest of the globe. But because it's not a state, they have this thing called home rule. And so basically, to simplify it, what it means is DC can pass whatever legislation it wants about its citizens, but Congress is going to be the one that has the final say, and then the president. So you have a whole bunch of folks who live in a space and for all intents and purposes don't really have a say. Because DC is not a state, it doesn't have 2 senators.
Wow.
So when we're talking about how we confirm the Supreme Court justices, we had our first black female Supreme Court justice, Ketanji Brown Jackson. The issue is DC didn't really have a say in it because they don't have representation. So when they're saying on these bumper stickers and these things, no taxation without representation, like that's in part what makes DC an anomaly and something we need to work on, right? Because they have a say to an extent, but they can always be overridden by a vast majority of people who represent other states that don't identify with your population, that's impeding their own thought processes and viewpoints on our population.
That's wild. Like, I would assume that they would be their own entity and have their own way of thinking for real.
And they do, but it's often bucked against and overridden.
Right.
For these other political priorities, and DC used to be strongly chocolate city.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
We got gentrification, that magic trick, what Dave Chappelle say, when white people move in and then all of a sudden black people start disappearing. But that's the reality of that nature is they have a say, but that say is not being respected. And the reason I bring that up, I often say, even as I'm counseling my clients, there's no such thing to me as voiceless people. We often say, I'm the voice for the voiceless. There's no such thing as voiceless people. Sure. What you have is people whose voices have not been preferred. People whose voices, that narrative just doesn't quite fit with my end goal. And so then we try to silence, we try to objectify, we try to get people to diminish their own thought process. And so, that's why even things like your podcast, my podcast, just this ability to help empower people over the airways is important because they're getting a lot of garbage that's making them feel worthless already.
Definitely. Damn, I had another question. It was about, politics. We're talking about politics. How important is it to vote in inner city versus the bigger ones, like president versus your local mayors and all of that?
I would say every election matters at every level.
Okay.
And so, often what happens is we have these state and local elections in 1 year in most states, and then we have the federal elections where like you vote for your president or the your congressional member. In Virginia, which I live in Virginia, but in Virginia and in New Jersey, There's some of the fewer states that actually we have our state elections in off years, odd years.
Wow.
So, I'm practically voting every year.
Wow.
Because I'm voting for, my federal elections, and then I'm voting for my state elections.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're in one of those states where it's all on one, it's important for you to vote all the way down the ballot, right?
Sure.
Because the presidency matters. Sure, it does. But the Constitution gives Congress the power of the purse. It gives Congress the ability to write legislation. They have the ability to declare war.
Definitely.
But then at the same point, policy is only as good as it's being implemented. And I think, that happens at the state and local level. And so here's an example I'll use. We remember Obama. President Obama was in office, and he campaigned on hope, change, and healthcare.
For sure.
Right? That Affordable Care Act, and that people can be able to get the services that they needed to be able to afford. Well, he had passed that good legislation. He'd even passed Medicaid expansion. He got Congress to, send him a bill. He signed it. But then you had an implementation problem at the state and local levels. That's where a lot of the deliverables. And so this is that disconnect where people feel like government is not working for me. In part, it's because if you didn't vote strategically down ballot, it's not enough for you to just vote for president.
For sure.
Because that president ain't got no juice if he don't have a Congress that's going to work with them.
Yeah.
And then they don't have no juice if they can implement, in weird ways. The last thing I'll say on that, though, too, is today, I brought up Obama, but let's see, today we had, I believe it was been in Alabama, there's this black man who has been voted in as mayor. 87% of the population that he represents is black. And yet a smaller percentage is white, and they locked him out of town hall.
What?
They're not allowing this man to be able to,
play
his role
For sure.
that he's supposed to. And so herein, again, at the state and local level, lest we just think that everything's about the federal level, it hits different where these fights have always been at the local level, at the state level, because that's where we actually hand off the services. So that you say you want, the ability to be able to afford food, that's a local and state thing. It takes the federal government, but it's going to hit at your local space.
Definitely.
So every election matters at every level at all times.
Okay. Isn't Virginia one of those states where they make their own laws? What's that kind of state called?
When you say make their own laws,
I feel like they still abide by like the laws of the masses, like, or do they?
So they do. They most of your states, or all of your states are still have a relationship with the federal government. They rely on them for, very important services. Now, you do have sometimes these tribes, these Indian, Native American, indigenous tribes,
For sure.
and they have their own somewhat, their council, their way of living, which I think we need to shout out. As in October, we'll be celebrating Indigenous People Day.
For sure.
Right? We had a bunch of colonizers that came over and started to subject their will.
Definitely.
And so, but it's a good thing that they have their ability to determine for themselves what their sort of lifestyle, their governance looks like. And they still do that in some ways in tandem with the federal government.
What's going on, y'all? This your boy, Only One Goat, man. Thank y'all for checking in to the only podcast with a Y. The coolest, dopest, rawest podcast in the land. Puttinyadown. Episodes dropping every Thursdays. Head over to the YouTube. That's PYDCAST. Hit that like, comment, subscribe. Cut on all your bell post notifications. You did. Then head over to the audio platform. That's www.puttinyadown.com. That's www.puttinyadown.show. My bad. Scratch the .com. We went .show.
Okay. You say you own a business too. How is it being an entrepreneur?
You know what? It's hard work, but it's good. I didn't see myself being an entrepreneur. That's actually my brother. He just thinks his ideas in the morning, and like by the evening time, it's done, and it's great and it's successful. When I built it, I had spent 8 years on Capitol Hill as a senior policy advisor. I had spent some time, in the Obama administration, and so doing this work, I saw firsthand how we can be around a space, but still not in the right places. we weren't at the highest level of policy making. Like they would give sometimes these black staffers poverty alleviation policy, because as if that's the only thing that we can talk about, you know what I mean? But, here I was dealing with more national security issues and or dealing with tech, and tech policy and these issues. So when I left to start the Daniel Initiative, it was out of necessity that we need to, for real, be connected to these high spaces and have the ability to like make those decisions even the more and have our say, because we know what a wink and the gun is going to get us.
For sure.
We had the Voting Rights Act passed. Supposedly the 15th Amendment was supposed to give black men the right to vote. It wouldn't be till 100 years later that we would get it through the passage of the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. So, we know what it is to be like, oh, you're welcome. And then there's a knife in your hand and you're trying to stab us in the back. So I came to this entrepreneurial journey just more because black people, brown people, other multi-marginalized communities needed an ability to have say in government, right? And in their governance at all these different levels, and better understand the systems that are hurting them. And so that kind of thrust me into this entrepreneurial journey. It's been a learning experience. My hat is off as well now to anybody that's in that. But that why, I think, is what keeps me now. We're about to turn 12 years old in February. That why, when I get up, I'm thinking about those who aren't invited into the rooms that I'm in. But those questions that are being asked and that we're discussing have impacts on them.
Definitely.
So you should be in the room.
Definitely.
It's the least we could do if we're going to say there's going to be a democracy.
Okay. So we got a segment on our show called Put Up, Put Down, right? Okay. So put up is I'm gonna ask you a question. Put up, you dealing with it, you like it, you going for it. Put down, you're not dealing with it at all, and you go explain why you're not dealing with it, why you putting down on it.
Okay.
Got me?
Okay.
All right. So I'm gonna ask you a question. We going politics or podcasting? Policy or podcasting? And which one you putting up with? Which one you put down on?
I'm going to put up with podcasting. I'm going to put down policy.
Okay.
And the reason why is because since I already come from a policy background, I think being able to have the microphone to spread to the masses gives me that ability to continue to do what needs to be done. Okay. So I would put up podcast and put down policy.
All right. I got one more for you, because you said you lived overseas at a few different places. All right. So living out of America or living in America?
Ooh. Who's president? Look, there's days I vacillate because since I was born in Spain, I have access to dual citizenship.
For sure.
And so, there's days if it feels like we about to go back to a Donald Trump, I might go have to put up Spain and put down the United States. Look, we can zoom in. We can do Zoom and be able to connect with family and stuff and see se puede overseas.
For sure. Hey, we ain't gonna hold too much more of your time, man. We appreciate you for this episode. Thank y'all for tuning into another episode. Like, comment, subscribe on all platforms. www.puttinyadown.show. I am the big fella, boss down big. I'm here with
Breon Wells.
My man, Breon Wells. Get them all your platforms and your drops where they can find you at.
Absolutely. So on Instagram, it is the letter I, the letter M, Breon Wells. That's BreonWells. You can reach me on Twitter at RealDaniel24. And then our website, www.thedanielinitiative.com. And then finally, our new podcast, The Policy Plug. It's at The Policy Plug on Instagram and all platforms.
All right. Like, comment, subscribe, man. Thank y'all for tuning in. We gone.
Pull you down.
This commercial is brought to you by T-Shirt Plug. On the plug with 2 G's, man. Hey, this commercial is brought to you by T-Shirt Plug, where power meets bring that back. And I'm trying to go off the top, like you trying to go off what you said and off the top. I don't remember my goddamn slogan. That's terrible. I don't even remember. Damn. Let's see how that shit went. Hey, this commercial is brought to you by T-Shirt Plug, Plug's World. On the plug with 2 G's, man. Connecting power to apparel. Tap in. Hey, follow us on our platforms at T-Shirt Plug. That's T-Shirt Plug, PLUGG, on all platforms. Tap in.
When I fall off, it be a while I'm putting you down. When I fall off, it be a while I'm putting you down. Put you down. Put you down. putting you down.